Hello, everybody. I am so excited today to be speaking to somebody who is East Coast to the max, but has the West Coast sensibility and all points in between. This is somebody that, 2011 Hip Hop Artist of the Year from the Boston Music Awards. This is somebody who's just been doing it all. 11 movies under his belt and more to come. And George Carroll, you may know him as MC Slaine or as Slaine, and so much that he's done. I love that cup, by the way, as somebody who's half Irish. Thank you for being my guest today. I appreciate it. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Before we get started, I just want to make sure with the Zoom recording that you're not getting text messages come down on your screen.
No text. Yes.
All right.
You're good. You're clear. First of all, let's start where we need to, and that's the Boston hat, Red Sox. How are they going to do this year?
Well, I'm not super focused on the Red Sox yet. I'm a little disappointed in the front office, but as you can see,
there we go. There we go.
I'll be attending the Celtics game 1 of the playoffs tomorrow. We got the Bruins going Monday. They just set the single season record for most
President's Cup winners. Yes.
Yeah, most wins in a season, and I think we have a chance with both teams to win the championship. So, I'm focused on them right now. Of course, I'm a huge baseball fan and Red Sox fan. I'm a little disappointed in the front office. That's all.
Listen, I hear you and I agree, and about the front office, because as a Met fan, you are a Red Sox fan. You just are, because we have the mutual distaste for the Yankees. So I'm a big hockey fan, the Bruins had just a heck of a year, and as a Knick fan, I fell in love with Cornbread Maxwell and Robert Parrish, and of course Ainge and Bird, and those were mine. Those Celtics were mine. Why? Because the Knicks were awful. You know, in those years, you had to find another team. And
the Knicks are pretty good this year.
Oh yeah, no, they're very good. We're gonna have a nice little run in us.
We have a hard time with the Knicks this year. You guys have beat us in overtime a couple times, I think. Like, you got a good squad. You got some really good young players too, and Randall is obviously a beast. The Knicks are better than they've been.
And the problem, I think, with that, if we can get into those weeds for a second, is both teams play very similar. They play very similar ball. I call it street ball, kind of ugly, a little transition, but it's beautiful. It's not just throw up the 3-pointer and that West Coast nonsense we have out here. It's very just East Coast proud. Let's just put it that way. But anyway,
where are you based? You're in California?
Yeah, I'm out here in California, out in Fresno. And
nice.
So, I came out here 16 years ago from New York City, and I got family up in Cape Cod, so I get up that way as well. So much I want to talk to you about, but the first thing I want to talk to you about is your character of Dom Lorenzo in One Day as a Lion. Sincerely, and you'll learn this, I don't BS. I thought your role was so top notch, and here's why. You were put in a very tough position. I mean, Scott King wrote it, and John directed it. But you were sort of a middle-level manager, but you're not. And you have a relationship with Jackie Powers, but you don't. Talk to me a little bit about what you thought of going into that role, because it was obvious you weren't just spitting out, a script. Who was Dom Lorenzo?
Well, I think, first of all, it was very last-minute situation, so I didn't have a lot of prep work. I came in, I was called very late in the game, and I started shooting the next day. So I had to kind of really familiarize myself with the character and with the story at a rapid pace, which happens sometimes. And sometimes, honestly, you can really just rely on your instincts in those kind of situations. That's
exactly what I was going to say, because it looked very intrinsic. It was like, this is how I would handle this. I wasn't watching somebody act up there. It seemed very real.
Yeah, well, with some roles you play, you really have to study who who a person is, a character is, and not that I wouldn't study in all situations, but
Sure.
given the circumstance, but I felt, I know this guy, so it's like, that's one of the things about lived experience is, if I read something and I really identify with the character and I know who he is kind of instinctually, like it's a little easier to like slide into their skin. And it's always like driving somebody else's car around, you know what I mean? Like when you're playing a role. And I just really kind of focused on the relationship. It was a very incestual kind of story, right? Like it's like, Jackie is my very good friend from childhood.
Yeah.
I'm sleeping with his ex-wife. And I'm also, it's about business for me. He's put me in a difficult position with my boss.
He put you in a very, I don't want to give away the story because I want people to see it, but he put you in a very difficult situation.
That's right. Yeah. So that was kind of the dynamic in the kind of given circumstances, so.
Right.
Yeah, man. I mean, and with that, like, I mean, I really enjoy doing that kind of thing. And, I always feel very free playing a character, and especially if it's somebody that I know, you know what I mean? So,
oh, yeah. Well, because again, without going into any detail of common backgrounds, I know that guy. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
I've been that guy. That's all I'll say. Because you grew up in the neighborhood, they're friends, and then they become associates for certain things, and there's certain discussions that have to be had. Without giving anything away, how much do you think, and I'll try to speak in code so I don't give anything away, what happened with your conversation with Jackie Powers in the hotel room led to your decision at the end of the movie?
Well, I think I'm very conflicted throughout, right? So, speaking of acting, I think Dom has to act in all these different scenarios. So he's playing different roles in each scenario. And, there's a certain element. What was interesting is there's an element of fear that I have with Frank's character.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And, and then, then there's when I'm doing the scene with J.K. Simmons, I'm very much coming in as an intimidating force. So there's no fear, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of, and with Jackie, it's like, it's a friendship that's kind of been betrayed, that's in the act of being betrayed on both ends, right? So there's, he kind of takes the tack where he's like, I'm not afraid of you, and I have to come and be the enforcer and the intimidator. And I'm put in this position where, I have to choose between my personal loyalties and my professional life. And, that was kind of the element to play. So I'm kind of a different guy to each person in the story.
But isn't that life?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because sometimes I talk to people. I've been podcasting now for a couple of years, and I talk to different people about certain things. It's not that, this person's fake here or this person's fake. It's different clothes we got to wear. It's different aspects of a full person. So when you're talking to this Simmons character, you have to be one way, and that's your true self. When you're talking to the Frank Grillo character, Paulie Russo, which I thought was great, was because, again, not overstating the acting performance, but you played perfectly that intimidate and respect, and enough of friendship there, because that's what we do. If I'm friends with a boss who I know can just kill me, there's all those things are happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So
so that was the fun thing to play with, and that playing Dom. I got to kind of play with all those different dynamics. There's a different dynamic in every scene, depending on what position of power we are in, right? And I think a lot of people could relate to that in professional environments or, even like physical kind of dominant kind of
Oh, yeah.
themes. So in life that we just face, like, you're not going to talk to your boss the same way you talk to your employee. You're not going to talk to the guy who's 6'7", 300 pounds, who's in your face as you would
Right.
to the guy who's more your size or smaller,
Oh, absolutely. It's much easier for me to punch down than it is for me to punch up. Just saying. But so, I mean, you've worked with some amazing people. Ben Affleck's in 2007, Gone Baby Gone, and you just mentioned J.K. Simmons and Academy Award winner, and of course the great Frank Grillo, and all points in between. How do you, and whether it's with your music, whether it's with your acting, how do you go into that? Because let's be honest, you're sitting there, you're sitting across Academy Award winners, but yet you know intrinsically you belong in that room, where you can at least fake it enough from time to time. What's your process?
Yeah, I really don't think about that aspect of it too much, and I'll tell you why. I got a good dose of that with hip hop music, so I didn't have movie stars on my wall. I always loved movies. Back in the days of video rentals, I would go and rent everything I could. I mean, I got to a point where I had seen everything in the video store. You know what I mean? So I've seen a lot of movies. I'm a student of film. I've always enjoyed like dissecting, themes and acting performances and photography and all that. I love the craft in general across the board, from the acting to the cinematography and all that. But I didn't canonize actors the same way that I did hip hop artists,
Right.
So like my heroes growing up were, House of Pain and Cypress Hill and Wu-Tang Clan and Nas and Biggie Smalls and Ice Cube and, people like that. So like at DJ Premier. And when I had the experience of working with some of those people early on in my music career, or at the beginning of my music career, of my professional music career anyways, that was when I felt like, oh my God, do I belong here? That was where it was like, I was much more in a position of awe, of shock and awe, and having to like center myself and ground myself. Those guys were superheroes to me. Actors, not so much, like,
Right.
and to be honest with you, I feel 1,000% more comfortable acting because of what I said about like driving somebody else's car around. There's no reason to be self-conscious as an actor because it's not you.
Right.
You're playing somebody else, right? So, I feel comfortable in that element, and and also the music came first, so I kind of got some of that starstruck stuff out of my system early on, and when I'm acting in a scene, I really just am in it, like as the character, and I try to just live in the given circumstances, and I try not to think about anything else that's going on outside of what that world is.
So, we're talking about music, and I listened recently to your interview on the podcast, One Life, One Chance with Toby Morris. So, and I'm a firm believer, I'm not a big who's the GOAT, top 5. That's just not my thing, and people like talking about it. But what I find interesting, and again, what I know specifically to the hip hop world is can fill a thimble, maybe, but what would you classify Arrested Development as? Because I think the song Tennessee is brilliant, what it's about, what it says. So where are they in that world, in the icon? Where would you put them?
Well, everybody has their own opinions and all that. I don't think that I'm like specifically that my opinion is worth more than anybody else's.
I agree. We're just two guys
Arrested
talking.
Development is hip hop, and they're a great group from the golden age. But I mean, to me, to me, I mean, I would name 50 groups ahead of them, or they wouldn't
which
even
is great.
register.
So,
But I appreciate their artistry, and
Mhm.
they definitely, I think they had another song too that was pretty good. And but I never really, to be honest with you,
Mr. Windle was another big hit by them.
I haven't done the deep dive into their catalog. And
Yeah.
you know, when I was that age, I was into much harder stuff. Like
Oh, no, no doubt, no doubt. I mean, I hear you. And, you know, for me, like, for example, I went from Arrested Development to the Fugees. You know, Women Don't Cry, I think is brilliant. In fact, I think I like that version better than the original. And I know you're supposed to get beaten, tarred, and feathered for for saying that, but it's just wonderful. And like I tell people, because I grew up more into at my age, I'm about 10 years older than you. More of that CBGB's punk music and some of that world, and then into kind of like that house music and then hip hop and some of the other things that were going on at the time, and then the 90s grunge and whatever. Music resonates in our lives, doesn't it? In fact, I was just telling our mutual friend before we started, one of the many things I love about John and Jeremy's collaborations is how the words and the music are wonderful. The music in those movies is just top notch. You know, I mean, music is so important.
Yeah, you never realize how big a role audio, music, obviously, but just audio in general plays in a film until you watch it before it's been added in.
Right.
So I think that, you know,
So
it's something that, like, throughout life, I need music. I mean, music is such it's a coping mechanism, a release. Like, it's, you know, when we're in pain, we listen to music. When we're celebrating, we listen to music. You know, it's just, you know, what would life be without it?
well, I tell you, you know, I mean, we talk about a lot of things that you're doing right now, and all the things we can't forgive is your latest album, and you talk about trauma, and to me, that ties into addiction, that ties into recovery, that ties into a lot of who we are, and a lot of times we don't even know the trauma that we have. I mean, you know, I know, and I don't know what the ramifications were, but single household, alcohol, one of my parents, alcoholic parent, disengaged with one of my parents for almost 10 years. You don't know what it is, but you can't quantify it, but it's there, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. And I mean, you know, different people experience trauma in different ways. And I think, like, we can put all the traditional things that are traumatic, but there's even more. The list goes on and on. And, you know, what might be very traumatic to you might be,
Right.
you know, normal to me, or, you know, and again, it pops up later in life too. There's a reason why I wrote that album when I was much deeper in my sobriety, and you know, and I accidentally kind of stumbled on it, really just in the form of heartbreak, and it kind of uncovered some things through internal work that I did in the program. And I realized, I mean, this is about me, right? I mean,
Right.
this is about the way that I'm processing things because of these things that happened in my life, because of these things that I can't forgive, these
Right.
things that I can't forgive in other people. So it's like, that album is really about the things we can't forgive are the things that we will consistently repeat in our lives, because it affects our perception, right? And life is all in your perception. We create
Yep.
internally. Our life is created from our inner state.
Correct.
So until we can kind of let go of some of those things we can't forgive, we can't even live a life with freedom
Mhm.
from those things, because they ultimately become our kind of our capturers, right? They were beholden to these resentments and these fears and these things that we can't forgive.
And I don't think we have to forgive. I mean, this is just me talking my opinion. What we have to do is understand that as part of who we are when we make our decisions. But someone does you dirty, does you wrong, and it's going to affect the rest of your life, or whatever, or where you were at that time. You don't need to forgive them. I don't. Again, me.
Yeah, I
Just
mean, for
is.
me, I do, and I'll tell you why. I can't have freedom for that thing, right? So there's a famous saying, I'm sure you've heard it, like, resentment is a cup of poison you pour for your enemy and drink yourself, right? So
Yep.
I don't, you know, I think the understanding like what forgiveness means, it's for me, it's not for that person. So
Yes,
it doesn't
agreed.
mean I have to invite them back into my life to wreak
Yep.
more havoc.
Hmm.
It means that I'm letting go of it internally and accepting things as they are and accepting that person and having some level of compassion for the human condition. Like,
Hmm.
you know, that hurt people, and for them to behave in that way, that they probably were hurt in a similar way as
Right.
kids or whatever it was, and they're carrying that. So if I don't have some, it starts with forgiveness for yourself, right? So if usually the things I really loathe in other people are the things that I loathe in myself, right? So it's like
Hmm.
if somebody's really enraging me with something they did, then I have to look internally.
Yes.
The resentment is always with me. It's never with them.
Right.
So, you know, and again, there's also acceptance for that's the way this person is. And I could just move on from having that person in my life. I can still forgive them. In other words, let it pass and not
Right.
hold it in my heart as something that makes me sick internally.
So, yeah, I mean, and I get that. And again, different strokes, different folks. I agree with that. But I'll give you a great example of what I mean. And so when I was younger, living in Brooklyn, we had neighbors on the block who ended up, the kids around my brother's age, my age, they broke into our house when they knew that my mother and my mom, single mom, good nothing. You know, my dad had a $32,000 a year salary, 3 kids. They got divorced. And they broke into the house, stole a bunch of stuff, stole all my mother's jewelry. Now, as an adult, even as a young person, I can understand that happened.
Mhm.
And I can understand that they were going through trauma themselves, probably hooked up or whatever they needed to do. And it's not that I forgive them as much as I want nothing to do with them. I mean, I wish them well, but that's where I sit. I'm that kind of person. But I want nothing to do with you. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not going to come hunt you down, and I'm not going to let it sleep lose sleep over it. But it's not okay. How's that? That's kind of where I sit with that kind of thing. You know, I am not going to say that I forgive. I'm not that strong of a person, and I
Yeah.
know that about myself because I know that I'll get triggered and go to a bad place.
Yeah.
You know?
Listen, you're talking about somebody who had uh, such a uh, problem with forgiving anybody like that.
Right.
I had to come to some peace around it, right? And I'm not saying I'm a saint and I just forgive everybody and I let people walk all over me.
No, and
I'm just saying that in order, like I can get so sick from, you know, I have wrath
mhm.
and, you know, wrath and pride, my two biggest character defects. And, you know, I have an ego that wants to smash and obliterate people who cross me.
Mhm.
And to live in a constant state of that is something that if I am doing that, I stay very sick in my addiction.
No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Um, you know, there's one thing that I like to see in performers, not that they have to for me, of course, but we're starting to see more people do what you're doing now. Music, film, writing, talking, working over at as chief community relations officer at Charles River.
Mhm.
20 years ago, everybody seemed like, hey, you got to keep it real. You got to stay in rap, or you got to stay as an artist. Movie people can't do television. Television people can't do movie. You're an entertainer. You know, you're an artist. It's changed, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've never really liked any restrictions like that. I mean, in the beginning, I'm a white rapper, right? So that right there is maybe not so much now, but when I started doing it, it was very much like, what?
Right,
You know, are
right.
you kidding me? You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Like there weren't that many of them. So
Right.
you know, it's like I've always kind of felt like you know, black sheep in a lot of different ways. And I've never really let like anyone's opinions box me in. And yeah, I mean, like, look, if it's something you enjoy doing, I tend to think like I didn't actually choose any of this stuff. It all chose me, you know, and
Mhm.
that goes for you know, working with people in early recovery, like that chose me. Like it's just the circumstances of opening up Charles River Recovery and being a part of that, like that wasn't something I intended to do. It was something that kind of chose me. It found me. And the pandemic kind of put me into this place where I was like out in the community, and I can't do like Zoom. I don't like to work my program on Zoom. I need human connection. And it eventually turned into, opening up a place that's a resource in the community. And the same thing with acting. Like, I mean, I didn't really choose to be an actor. It kind of found me. And I think like a lot of things are like that, where it's kind of like we get, I speaking of creating something internally, like when we have a passion and a gratitude for something naturally, it's something that we really love to do. I think it has a way of finding us and
Right.
kind of becoming our path. I really believe that.
Oh, no, I agree. And let's talk about recovery a little bit. And I want to start with a misnomer, in my opinion, that you prove. Out there used to be, you have to do it for yourself. You have to do it for yourself. And I heard you talk about this. No, you did it for your son.
Yeah.
I know when my dad went through his recovery, he did it for his children. He did it for his children. I mean, when he called me and my brother in to take the guns out of the house, he did that for us because he knew what he wanted to do, but he wanted to get well for us. Talk a little bit about that, about breaking that paradigm that says you have to do it for yourself.
I mean, I think over time I ended up, for the long term, I have to do it for myself. I have to find, I have to find forgiveness for myself and some semblance of self-love. I think a lot of us can struggle with that. I have a self-loathing streak that I still can struggle with at times. And maybe that's just the creativity and the artistic side. But, I think like, I didn't love myself enough to get sober for myself. Like, so doing it for myself was never really an option. And I also my identity was so tied up with drugs and alcohol and chaos and violence and all the things that go with that. Like, I wore that stuff like a badge of honor. So there was nothing that was going to break me from that pattern. Nothing. There was no consequence. There was no opportunity, nothing. And, but when we have that moment where we realize how badly it's affecting somebody that we really love more than we love ourselves. And, for me, it was my son. So, for a lot of people, I think it is, because that is the realest sense of unconditional love we ever experience as humans is in our children. Right. So, I mean, there's no way that I ever find my way without the love that I have had and have for my son.
Oh yeah, and I think you said something. I mean, all of it's powerful, but you end up having to do it for yourself later on. But to get there, you have to whatever it is to help you get to where you want to get is okay. So, for example, I'm a big harm reduction advocate. I'm a big believer that so like we've given away free naloxone, we've given away fentanyl testing strips, and 3 or 4 years ago, even people didn't want to grab that stuff because what are you trying to say? I'm a druggie, my kid's a druggie. Now people understand it's saving some lives. And that's all part of it. There was a gentleman named David Postis who unfortunately passed away, and he wrote this great book about how Suboxone gave him 20 plus years of life. He was able to get married and have some kids and do some wonderful things. He was a wonderful author. Very big into music, by the way. It's kind of changed because back then the only way that seemed to work or that people advocated was 12 steps. That's it. Sweat it out on the bed. Things have changed, haven't it?
Absolutely. And, by the way, you're talking to a guy who's the 12 steps have saved my life. So I'm a
Oh,
big
sure.
believer in the 12 steps.
That's what my dad did. Same.
Yeah, if you hang around long enough though, man, like, they say cunning, baffling, powerful, right? Like this thing will humble all of us, right? So
Mhm.
every situation is different. And of course, like, for people who don't believe in harm reduction, I'll give you this as a simple thing. Like, even people in the 12-step programs promote harm reduction in this way. Like they tell you to, when you're having cravings early on, right? Or you want to use, to have some sugar, right?
Yep. Yep.
Is that not harm reduction? To
It
have a
absolutely
cigarette,
is.
to
Yep.
have a cigarette if you're stressed out, is that not
Mhm.
harm reduction? We know that cigarettes are very unhealthy and kill people. It's
Right.
not as quickly as drugs and alcohol, but I would say that's harm reduction. In other words, like when
Oh, absolutely.
somebody comes in for detox, like, and they're a drug addict and an alcoholic. They might also be like a gambling addict, a sex addict, and everything else. But we're putting first thing first. Like you're here for, we don't have to fix the entire problem in 7 days, right? So
Right.
that is harm reduction, right? Like we're just addressing the most the thing that's on fire at the time
Correct.
first. So to not believe in harm reduction is kind of silly. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Because
I agree. My,
um,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
but with the medication, yeah, and it goes both ways. So like I said,
Mhm.
at the capacity that I am working kind of in this field now, over the past couple of years, I've seen a lot, man, and there's no one correct answer. And sometimes methadone or Suboxone can be a hindrance, and sometimes it can be a help. And I've seen everything from one side of the spectrum to the other. And a lot of people are just addicted to medication, and you don't. You really have to take it case by case, and
I totally agree.
the answer is always compassion.
Yep.
Like, and it's not up to me what somebody else's recovery looks like. Like what works for me might not work for the next guy. And what
Mhm.
I want might not be what somebody else wants. Now, for me, I don't want to be dependent on any substance or any medication. And, there's been times in my sobriety where there's been difficult decisions. Like, should I, maybe medication would benefit me, and I haven't done that. But
Mhm.
I'm not saying that if it was recommended to me and I made a decision that I needed to go on some sort of medication that I wouldn't. I think
Right.
it's case by case, and it depends on the scenario. I think recovery to me is what's making your life better. So if you know somebody is on medication that's saving their life every day, that's what's important. Let's keep the person alive today,
Mhm.
and we never know what's going to
That's
happen or
worse.
where they want to go after that. That's kind of where I fall on it.
Oh, I do as well. I do as well. And I know a lot of police officers, first responders that I grew up around in my neighborhood of Brooklyn. They who fought alcoholism or fought Quaaludes, because that was back then, late 70s, early 80s, or some of the other things. We would go to, say, a Dunkin' Donuts at 3 in the morning, because that was the time that they would use, or would find themselves in a bad spot. We would just sit there and really not even talk. It's that time. My body is used to being up at this time doing something. And it was just sort of that refocusing. I have a friend of mine who played in the NHL. I'm a cigar smoker. So we would go to the cigar shop sometimes, and people would look at us because we're both on our phones like this. Why aren't you guys communicating? Because I just need somebody to sit with who gets me. I'm trying to shut out the world, because this is the time that I would be doing this by myself. I just need to be doing something by myself. So there's even that whole, when you're overcoming trauma or working with trauma or working with overcoming addiction, because I see the two together. What it looks like on the outside might not be what's going on. Sometimes we just need a good listener or somebody who understands me enough to let me sit and do nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, that's how I really identify if I have a good friendship with somebody, a good relationship with somebody, is I can sit in silence with them comfortably.
Right.
and I don't have to say something. You know, when you don't know somebody that well and you feel like you're sitting with them and you have to say something in order for it not to be uncomfortable.
Right. No, I agree 1,000%. I want to go back to a little bit your music, because I've heard you talk about how, and of course you evolve. Some of your earlier music you wouldn't want to listen to or play today, and some of your other stuff. But isn't that kind of, that's a good thing, right? I mean, that's how we grow. I mean,
Growth, yeah.
God knows there's words that I used back in the day I would never use now. That's who, and not because of any sort of gaslighting and woke culture, but just growth, personal growth. Personal.
Absolutely.
So with your fan base, you probably get, oh, come on, do you want to play? Do you just tell them, or you just don't do it, or how do you make that work?
So it's funny because I got a message from somebody the other day, and they said, your stuff from the first mixtape I put out I was very heavily into active addiction, and I had a certain anger and hunger and desperation that this gentleman who is in active addiction seemed to really identify with, and I get that. Like that's
Sure.
that's where kind of his head's at, and he was like, man, like, the stuff, it feels like it's like half-hearted now, or it's not as inspired. And the reality is like he was referring to some music that is by far my most inspired work.
Right.
And and also the highest level of technical ability and the craft that's been developed over years and years. But if somebody is at a certain place, they want to identify with something that's at that place. So and it's the same reason why, and I think I talked a little bit about this on Toby's podcast that you referred to, but like, I hear music from a 18-year-old kid who's maybe really talented, and I could respect their craft and their music, but I don't necessarily listen to it because I'm just at a different place in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no knock on the music. I'm just in a different spot. So, all I can ever do is make music that's reflective of where I am now, because it's a present moment thing. I'm writing in the present moment about what I'm feeling in the present moment, what I'm going through, or even if I'm reflecting on something in the past, I'm writing about it from the perspective of the present moment, right? So it's all through that filter. And a long time ago, I realized, like, I make music for me and my own personal experience, and whoever else wants to get on board with it, great. That's a blessing. But I can never make music based on what I think other people want to hear,
Right.
because it's a betrayal. Then it stops being art, and it starts becoming a product. It starts becoming a commercial product. And there are some people that do that, and they do very well with it. And I'm just not one of them.
I believe I want to give the credit to Eric Appler, who I've had on my show. He has a radio show up in Canada, who said that a lot of artists, and I want to know if this is true in your case, find the second album the most difficult, because the first one, even though it took you 10 years of writing, before you got to World with No Skies, your first solo album at least. The second one, it seems to be like, do I repeat what I did? I'm growing a fan base, and I'm doing this organically. Do I give them more of the same? Do I do something radically different? And his thought was that a lot of people tell him it's the third album where you really start to find your groove.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you mention that, because I'm just thinking, and I think my second album came out 10 years ago today. It's called The Boston Project. So I kind of had a cheat code for that, right? So, and again, the waters are muddy, because the first couple albums I made were mixtapes that weren't technically official albums. A World with No Skies was my first album, but it got pulled off the shelves, and I had to recreate half of it to put out A World with No Skies 2.0. So I don't know what's considered my second album, but I think technically on the books, The Boston Project was my second album, which is a cheat code because it's a collaborative album where I want, at the time, like, Gone Baby and the gone and the town had come out. The Coka Nostra was probably the biggest group in indie
It
hip
was.
hop for a few years. And I wanted to take the attention that I had and put it back on my city, because I thought that Boston was kind of an overlooked city for hip hop talent. And I put a lot of people on that record. And so in one way, it was a great way to kind of highlight the people who supported me and made me who I am. You know, like, without the people of Boston, I don't have a career. They're the ones who backed me, supported me, got behind me. They're my inspiration. It's where I write from. It's my home. So, you know, in one way, it was like a way to give back. And another way, it really took the pressure off what the next album is going to be, because it was collaborative. And then I guess my next true solo album was The King of Everything Else. And I recorded that at the same time that I did the Boston project. And it was very much, I felt in this way like I was indestructible. And it was like I was crashing into a wall, and I knew it, but I was I was like thrilled by the high speed that I was going at, even though I saw the wall coming. And that's what that record was. So I didn't feel too much pressure from outside forces. It was really like my world was exploding in a negative way. My world was crumbling all around me, and I was speeding through it like faster than a speeding bullet right into a wall.
So what is your process, without giving away secrets? Are you a lyrics first, then the music? Are you music first, then the lyrics? Are you, I hear something, this reminds me of something I might want to do? What's your inspiration?
Well, I was always lyrics without music for my entire childhood. And, you know, I would get instrumental tapes and I would write to some stuff like that, I guess. And then it became like go through beats and, you know, music first, and then craft the lyrics around the music. And then as I evolved and I started really working in the studio all the time, you know, like I would stay in the studio for weeks and weeks at a time. And that's kind of where I really started to kind of master what I do, master my craft, and write very quickly. And like, that was my process, especially in my active addiction, because it was just me and the music, and the studio has no windows and I am just locked in.
Right.
And, you know, that was when I learned how to write with the music at the same time while the music's being built, and let the music build off of what I'm doing, and then I build off of what the music's doing, and it goes back and forth. So I've really only worked with a few different producers for my solo work in the past 13 years, maybe 3 producers, Static Selector, DJ Lethal, Louis Bell, and The Archetype. And with all of them, I sit in the studio and craft it that way. I don't really accept beat submissions from people generally, unless I hear something that I think is amazing, and I'm like, but I don't actively look for that, because I'm in it for the process. You know, like I said, it's not really a product to me. It's a process. It's like it's a feeling. It's a way to cope with my feelings. It's a way to get out what I'm feeling, and it's a way for me to examine what my perceptions are.
How do you, I'm going to shift gears now, just in terms of a holistic approach to you, without giving away any personal stuff. How do you are doing movies, you're doing music, you're doing stuff in recovery. How do you find time for you? And I know I struggled with one thing for many years of, I knew what I didn't like, but I don't know if I knew what I liked to do. So even on my downtime, other than sleeping and resting and having a lot of cigars and a couple of cocktails, I didn't know what I wanted to do. What do you like to do? And I know now what I like to do. And what do you like to do? How do you find time for yourself, for self-care?
Well, I still struggle with finding time for self-care. And, you know, as I said before, all the things that I do, there are things that I naturally do. I would do any of the things that I do for free. You know what I mean? It's just, they've become my life and my livelihood. But I do struggle with finding time to power down. It's funny because I'm actually doing that this week. You know, I'm actually, because it's April vacation for the kids, and that's really what I like to do, is I like to hang out with the kid with with the kids, man. Like, I like to hang out with my son and watch games and watch movies and throw the baseball around and go to the gym and all that. And I like to hang out with my woman and her daughters, and which I consider like my own. You know what I mean? I like to spend time with all of them. And yeah, that's the downside to being so busy with all this other stuff, is sometimes I cheat myself out of that time in service to these other passions that I have.
So before I let you go, I heard you talk on the podcast we mentioned, talking about Candyland. I want to again and before ask you about that. I think that movie is absolutely brilliant.
Me too.
I'd compare it to American Beauty, because it really takes topics, because I know truck stops intimately. That's all I'll say. And it takes topics that normally people don't talk about, like American Beauty did, and really just throw it out there in a way that's not preachy. Here it is. Here's what the reality is. Deal with it. And
yeah, I think John is a brave filmmaker, and it's also part of what I love about independent filmmaking. I mean, it obviously comes with its own set of challenges, just like independent music does. Monetary budgets, all that you can be limited at times, but the trade-off is that you get freedom, and nobody's dictating how you can present things, or saying, what you're going to what, you can't do that,
yes, I can. Watch me.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because it's I'm not in that one. I've done a lot of movies with John and Jeremy, and I'm not in that one. And I told them after I saw that at the screening, I said, I think this is my favorite film that you've done.
I'll tell you a little inside baseball story, because when I went to the premiere out in Southern California, I brought my daughter with me, and my daughter is 22, 23. And at first she was like, I said, no, she knows this is a little reality. She loved it as well. It's just because that's the real world. That's just kind of the real world. One other one I wanted to ask you about that is Body Brokers, because of what you do now. I think that movie and Candyland both are going to have incredible legs, because
absolutely. I was going to say that I think those are my two favorite films that John has done, and I'm not in either one of them.
But yeah, it's great. So what's next for you?
Well, I did some pretty cool stuff in the past 6 months. Some of it I can't talk about yet, but got some cool opportunities coming up. I'll continue to act, and I don't chase it, man. I really just take it as it comes, and only do stuff that I'm really interested in doing. And yeah, and same with music. I'm finishing up an album and halfway through another one, because it just happens like that sometimes. But I'm not rushing it, and there's nothing that I need to get out of any of it. I have everything that I need in my life, and I'm just kind of doing what feels right a day at a time, and I feel like eternally grateful to even be here and be alive. So,
well, thank you for sharing your story with me today, and thank you for all that you do to help people now in addiction, and your music and your movies. And I mean this sincerely. When I'm at the Cape this summer, if you're in the area, like to hang out. And cigars on me.
Let me know. I like smoking cigars too.
Excellent. Have a good day, sir.
All right. Thanks, man.